Shock has gripped Kenya following the discovery of mass graves linked to a religious cult. Police are investigating Pastor John Mackenzie Nthenge, who's accused of directing his followers to starve themselves to death so they could meet Jesus. More than 100 bodies, including some of children, have been exhumed from the shallow graves in the Shakahola Forest near Kenya's coast, where the church was based. Now, another pastor with a much higher profile has also been arrested and is facing charges relating to what police call the mass killing of his followers, although the two cases have not been officially linked. Kenya's President William Ruto has promised swift action.
The government of Kenya and I have instructed the agencies responsible to take up the matter and to get to the root cause and to the bottom of the activities of religious or people who want to use religion to advance weird, unacceptable ideology. Terrorists use religion to advance their heinous acts. People like Mr. Mackenzie are using religion to do exactly the same thing.
So how does one get sucked into such cult or cult-like organizations? A question I put to Irungu Houghton, the director of Amnesty International in Kenya.
You know, I think in the case of the Islamic faith, we've really been concerned about radicalization and terrorism for several decades now. So in the Islamic faith, there is a fairly robust counter-violent extremism culture and set of programs that have been running. But I think for the Christian community, this is increasingly becoming a matter of concern in recent years. But I think the drivers are probably kind of three or four. The first is that, over 40 years ago, the All Africa Conference of Churches raised the alarm about the emergence of evangelical prosperity churches that promised prosperity to their followers, and the cult of the leader, the cult of the religious leader. So it's not something that just started yesterday. I think there's been a real concern that without regulation and without oversight, it is possible for anybody to set up a business or a cult in the name of religion and essentially brainwash their followers. So I think that's one driver. The second driver is that Kenya is increasingly grappling with the cost of living and poverty and inequalities, and the sense of hopelessness for many Kenyans is increasing day by day. And I think any person that can promise a better afterlife or a freedom in another life is increasingly becoming more popular in the sense that the economy is failing people.
You've called for, as Amnesty, you've called for swift prosecution, but what kind of charges would hold? I mean, brainwashing itself isn't particularly against the law, is it?
So there are a number of things that have been discussed. The first, of course, is, I guess, the easiest one, which is that under Section 266 of the Penal Code, helping somebody to commit suicide or assisted suicide is unlawful. Unfortunately, it is, in terms of this case, it is a misdemeanor and probably attracts no more than 2 to 3 years imprisonment, which pales really in the context of what we've seen in Shakahola. The second is really to look at this as a mass crime, and some people have said that they are interested in looking at this from the lens of international law, and particularly, I guess, some of the legislation that has assisted the ICC. And the third area relates to terrorism, and that this is another form of terrorism. Unfortunately, either the mass crimes or the terrorism charges, our lawyers, as Amnesty, looked at this, and despite the horror that we feel in terms of Shakahola, it is unlikely that the threshold has been met. And of course, the fourth area potentially that the prosecutors will look at will be the issue of child abuse. And here we do have strong legislation that would essentially lock away perpetrators for a very long time if it is found that they have used minors, if they have led to the deaths of minors.
I've seen one Catholic archbishop actually suggest that the government should audit all religious leaders. What do you think the government should be doing or should have done to prevent this case or other cases like it?
Well, I think there are three things that really we must, as citizens and civic organizations in Kenya, that we must demand right now. The first is accountability for why the intelligence services, why the investigative and police agencies did not catch this. It is very clear that the leader of this particular cult, Patrick Mackenzie, had been arrested for similar concerns, and that somehow he managed to be released by a court of law. I think the second area really relates to is it time now to regulate more closely religious bodies and ensure that they are essentially brought under closer oversight, not only by their own apex association, so greater self-regulation, but I think regulation by the state within the constitutional principle that of freedom of religion. I think we don't want to see any clawback in terms of that freedom. Kenya has been one of the more liberal societies in terms of the right to religion, but we do need to see greater oversight.
All right, Irungu, always good to speak to you. That's Irungu Houghton, the Director of Amnesty International, speaking to us from Nairobi. Thank you.
Thank you, Tommy.